Hey, welcome to this evening's webinar. Just really quickly, I wanted to welcome you guys out. This is something that I really enjoy doing. I love doing webinars because, one, I can't tell if you hate what I'm saying. And I also really hate it because I can't tell how much you absolutely love and are riveted by what it is that I'm sharing. So tonight what we're doing is we're talking about finding an audience and keeping it using social media tools. So as you can see by the PowerPoint presentation here, we're going to be looking at specifically how to use social media. There's obviously some preliminary stuff that I want to get to, but just in the way of an introduction, let me just kind of introduce myself a little bit, who I am, before we start talking about the illustrious audience that we're looking for. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I promise there's a point to actually using this information that you'll be able to see kind of how it incorporates in a little bit. But what we're going to do is I started my experience with media back when I was a play-by-play and commentary analyst for KOHS. It was a high school radio station. I was 17, 16 years old, calling football games and basketball games and pushing my way onto the table down on the floor at basketball tournaments and things like that. It was absolutely amazing. Then I went ahead and spent 2 years of my life in Venezuela, in the Maracaibo area. It's right near Colombia. Spent some time down there, which is kind of interesting because of everything that's going on right now with the unrest, with the protests going on, and the inflation they're experiencing down there. I have some friends still in Venezuela who are really, really struggling right now. So that's kind of been on my mind. And then I came home and went to college. I studied broadcast journalism at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and fell in love with the media. I became an anchor, a reporter, a board operator, everything at KSL News Radio in Salt Lake City. It's a pretty good sized market, but I was basically running everything within the station to do that for about a year and a half before I was made a broadcast director for a nonprofit organization. Did that for a little while I was getting my master's in mass communications from BYU. And then I actually started working as a traveling video editor. I had an opportunity to go to England. I had an opportunity to go to South Korea, Guatemala, a whole slew of different places as I was editing videos and serving as a producer for different content that I was creating. And then eventually I got to the point where I decided I was going to go back to school. I went back to the University of Texas at Austin to do my PhD, my doctorate in journalism, and I studied social media and branding and kind of how all these things come together. And that's where the basis for my knowledge and what I teach in my classes comes from, is that experience that I had at the University of Texas and kind of merging media with consumer behavior and social media and all of those types of things. So really quickly, as we talk about, and now you know me a little bit better, tonight we're here to talk about how to find an audience and keep it using social media, and some overarching kind of communications principles. And in order to do that, we just have to answer some of journalists' favorite questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. As a journalist in the past, I kind of fixate on those questions, the 5 W's and the H, is how a lot of us refer to them. But before we get into finding an audience, you have to know who your audience is. And before you can know who your audience is, you have to know who you are. So what is your story? Where do you come from? Where were you in the beginning? Who were you and what happened to make you the person that you are now? So this is a picture of me back when I was a little kid. This is kind of where I came from. I grew up the son of a teacher, and my father was a banker. And so I grew up being surrounded by numbers and surrounded by reading constantly. But who I am now, I kind of just told you a little bit more about that. Here's a photo of me when I was getting my PhD down at UT. And who do you want to be? This is obviously not my anticipated future. But it just kind of illustrates, you have to know kind of what your end goals are, keep those in mind. And then now that you have an idea about who you are and kind of what you want, you have to take those different things and turn them into talking points. You have to congeal that message and create a 16-second pitch, for example. So currently, just a quick example of a 16-second pitch. Here's mine. Currently as a clinical assistant professor in the Murrow College of WSU, I'm a passionate and driven family man, continually looking for opportunities to use my extensive knowledge and experience to help people and organizations develop strategies and develop and create content that they can use to reach their goals. So once you know and can share that message, it's all about being consistent. There is a previous webinar series that was done by a colleague of mine, Rebecca Cooney. She's in the Murrow College as well. She did a series that's actually available here through Global Connections called Brand You, part 1.0 and 2.0. They are fantastic. I would highly recommend going through and looking at those. Those kind of highlight the way it works to brand yourself as an individual if you're looking for an opportunity to improve your career, to move forward. And what I'm going to be talking about today is a little bit less about how to brand yourself, but focus more on how it works for a company. The branding works the same for both individuals and for companies. My dissertation research, I actually looked at comparing the photo and the image of a journalist to that of a business, and they function the exact same way. So feel free to consider yourself a company if you want to apply these things to yourself directly. But for the rest of this time, I'm going to be talking about things in the way of approaching things as a small business or a company, a corporation. So, for example, you can take Facebook, for example. Where did they come from? Well, back when Facebook first started in 2004, they were a university-based site. You can see here the old profile that they used to use. It was very, very kind of brick and mortar, very structured, a lot less fluid than it is now. This is what it looks like today. In 2019, they have 1.5 billion daily users on Facebook and 2.32 billion users in a month. And let's be honest, this is kind of what Facebook wants, is they want it to be a planet of Facebook users. That's kind of their future. That's what they anticipate having happen in what they're doing. So now that you've articulated kind of who you are, it's time to come up with what you want people to know about you. Let's talk about an example. Relatively new company. It's called Recorded Memory Solutions. Recorded Memory Media Solutions, I'm sorry. At the beginning of a company's life, who you were and who you are basically the same thing. They're kind of indistinguishable. But Recorded Memory is a small family-owned business that stemmed from a desire to record family history, interviews with older relatives as well as younger children, to kind of save that for posterity and to archive those moments and those memories. But who they are now, often one of the best ways to answer that question, especially if you're a relatively new company, is to answer the question of what problem do you solve? What is it that you anticipate doing for the market? Recorded Memory is a company that is helping to ensure that memories you make or have made in the past are safely recorded in the future. They conduct personal history interviews, film events, produce company public relations and marketing materials, even convert old slides and photos and home videos to digital files. And so that's who they are now. Well, who do they want to be? Their goal is to become a company that's a one-stop shop for individuals, families and businesses and communities when they think about keeping and maintaining visual records specifically. They aren't interested in going into television or film, so that's kind of their niche. They want to focus on the small-scale visual recording of material. So that's their kind of short 16-second pitch. So as you think about yourself in this same context, what is your 16-second pitch? Who are you? Where do you come from so that you can inform who you are and where you want to go? What do you want people to think of when they see your logo? I don't know what you guys think about this logo right here, Recorded Memory Media Solutions. I feel like it's pretty clean. It's pretty just generic. It lets you know what they deal with in the way of the film strip on the side, the film reel, kind of the old and the new. But what's the reputation that you want to have with your audience? So now that you've kind of articulated those talking points, what is your brand? You know what you are, you know what you do. Now we have to be talking about the perceived brand that we have. So according to Kotler, a brand is a name, term, sign, symbol, or design, or combination of those things that is intended to identify the goods and services of a seller or a group of sellers to differentiate themselves from those competitors. So as you take a look at these brands, I'm sure some of these are familiar to you. These are some of the most well-known brands, but can you tell me what they provide? Can you answer the questions that this definition from Kotler actually suggests you should be able to articulate when you see the brand name? How about these ones? These are the largest brands in each of the states across the United States. Obviously up here in Washington, we have Starbucks, Oregon, Nike, Idaho. I didn't anticipate Albertsons, but it makes sense. Back where I come from in Austin, Texas, where I did my PhD, Dr. Pepper Museum is right there in Austin, so that to me makes sense. So a lot of these brands have very, very specific feelings that are incurred when you think about these brands. Part of the definition that I want to point out is the last little bit that says to differentiate them from those of their competitors. Your attempts to differentiate yourself is considered branding, and Comer defines it as this: differentiating a product, guaranteeing its origins and quality, and forming a relationship with the buyer through a variety of techniques, including both mediated and interpersonal communication. So that art of changing things and trying to imbue the logo that you have, the business that you own and that you run, with a quality or a certain sense of reliability, that's the art of branding. So as you brand yourself and you craft your message, what is it that makes you different? What differentiates you from your competitors? Think about every aspect of your business. The quality of what you have to offer. You have your location, your experience, the personal service, all of those types of things should be considered as you start to try and figure out what is this message that we're going to share so that we can differentiate ourselves from all the other businesses in the area that are doing the same thing that we are. And then you can move on to those that you're trying to establish the relationship with, your audience. So now that we've considered what a brand is from your perspective, it's time to start looking at it from the audience's perspective. The thoughts and feelings of your audience make up what's called your brand image. Okay? The thoughts and feelings associated with a particular brand in the minds of the audience members. So that's the difference. An image comes from the audience. So when you see these two companies, Mercedes-Benz and BMW, what are the thoughts that come to your mind? As we go through this webinar, I'm happy to take any questions. If you guys want to throw a question out, I'd be happy to answer it as we go along. Don't feel like you have to hold off to the end. If we get to the end and we haven't had any questions, I will definitely leave some time for that as well at that point. But if you do have any questions, I have a wonderful assistant who will help me notice that those questions are being asked, and I will try to address those as we go. But as you think about these two brands specifically, BMW and Mercedes-Benz, what are the thoughts and the feelings that come along with those brands? Oftentimes I've heard people mention luxury, mention quality, but is what you buy really worth what you pay for it when it comes to these brands? I mean, because let's be honest, you look at the materials that they're putting together and the cars that they manufacture are a lot more expensive when you buy them than it would be to actually buy the materials and put it together yourself, regardless of the quality and the reliability of the parts. So why do you pay so much more? And it is for that brand. It is for that reliability, that recognition that we have, and that trust that we have in a specific brand. So let's consider this brand. Okay, what are the thoughts and feelings that come to mind when you see this logo? And my question is, do they change when you see these two images? Okay. On the left, you have the image of Colin Kaepernick, former NFL quarterback of the 49ers, took him to a couple of Super Bowls. Never won one, but he did take him there. And he is the face of that ad, talking about sacrificing things and standing up for what you believe in. Nike put out this ad, and there was response from both ends of the spectrum. People hated it. People loved it. People bought more Nike gear just because of it. And some people started burning their Nike apparel because of it. And then recently, I don't know how many of you that are participating in this webinar are college football, basketball fans. I am. Huge college basketball fan. Zion Williamson, one of the most recognizable college freshmen in the country, probably for the last, I don't know how many years. This young man on the #1 team, Duke Blue Devils, 30 seconds into the game against the crosstown rival North Carolina Tar Heels, he goes to pivot and blows through his shoe. You can actually see his foot coming through the shoe in that bottom right-hand corner. Since then, immediately Nike stock took a dip, but people and Nike itself have kind of commented and said, Nike's still going to bounce back. They still are the best shoe, blah, 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 blah. But how do these images get impacted by what happens? How does the appeal of these brands change and the brand image change based on the audience's perception? So when you consider the brand, you even have to start looking at the colors, the fonts, the way that things are working, and having that consistency. All of those things participate in the brand image. When you see those swirly texts of Coca-Cola, you know that text. Even if it doesn't actually say Coca-Cola. If somebody puts something else on a t-shirt using that same font, you think Coca-Cola, because that font has become so embedded with their brand that it's inseparable. So the strength of a brand is the ability to invoke positive thoughts and feelings that will increase the value of a product and potentially drive up sales. We do have a question.
It says how a company can come back from a negative, or how can a company come back from a negative brand perception? And is it true that all press is good press?
That is a very, very good question, and something that there are courses here on campus and through global programs and our online program that actually spend an entire semester talking about that, talking about crisis communication and those types of things. So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds to answer that question, and I apologize if I don't answer it to your approval. But one of the things that I will say is you are able to come back from most crises, from most major missteps. Nike's obviously going to be able to bounce back super, super easily. But there are certain brands, when we talk about individuals, the brand of a senator who might have been caught up in a sexual scandal. Sometimes they can't overcome those things, and sometimes not all press is good press. But a lot of that, what you need to do. Let me use another example. Wells Fargo. Recently, they went through a huge issue with the data being, personal information being stolen, personal information being released to different people and not being as secure as it should have been. What Wells Fargo did, and I think it was a brilliant move, was they basically just copped to it. They said, we screwed up. And they acknowledged the mistake. They didn't just try and hide it and gloss over it like it didn't ever happen. But then they even started a new campaign. And I don't know if you saw this, but they had a campaign, a series of commercials where it said, established in this year, reestablished 2018. And it was a whole effort to say, you know what, we're going back to what we were. We're going to learn from our mistakes and we're going to move forward. We are recommitting ourselves to our customers and to the people that trust us with their finances. And we are going to reestablish ourselves as a business and as a company, as a corporation, moving forward from this point. So I do feel like you can overcome those things. It's not always easy, and it definitely requires a very customized approach, depending on what's happened, depending on which of your kind of stakeholders you might have offended or might have ostracized through that action. For example, with the Nike shoe example, they have ostracized maybe some college basketball teams that might use their shoes. There might be some schools that say, hey, we're going to pull out of our contract because we don't want our student athletes getting injured. At the same time, you have companies like the NBA that are just like, well, we're going to step in on this and take advantage. I don't know if you guys saw the Puma reaction to when this blowout happened with Zion Williamson, but they sent out a tweet almost immediately saying, wouldn't have happened in Pumas, and they were able to use it to their benefit. So depending on how you use different things, you definitely can use certain press to your advantage and almost strengthen yourself and strengthen the brand that you have by being responsive. So moving on, so who is your audience? Who is it that's most likely to be interested in what you have to offer? So as you consider who you are as a brand, what your business is, what you're offering, how you differentiate yourself from the rest of the competition, who is it that's going to be interested? You consider things like gender, age, location, socioeconomic status. If you are a restaurant opening up because you want to provide, I'll give you an example of a mock company that a student of mine presented this semester. A restaurant serving hot pot Chinese traditional meals 24/7. An opportunity for people in Seattle specifically, to get 24/7 service. Well, they've had this idea because they're college students, and they recognize that they want to be able to go get a nice hot meal 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But they also thought strategically about where they wanted to open this business, and they set it next to the airport because then they could also get those travelers as well. Yes, question.
Is it worth it to use local census data as demographic info to tailor the experience to your target audience in your local business?
So I definitely think it is. There are studies and there's research that's done that's a little bit more current. Sometimes it takes quite a while for the census to actually come out and the information to be released because it takes them a while to gather it all, to collect it, then to clean it up to make sure that there aren't any outliers that are skewing the numbers. But I do think it is important to recognize what that demographic looks like, especially if you are a brick and mortar physical location type business. If you're an online business, I don't think demographics and a census really make that much of a difference. But you also, so going back to kind of considering who your audience is, what's their education level? Are they going to listen to a certain type of message over another? Are there certain industries that your company pairs well with? For example, the recorded memory business that we talked about just a second ago, it would be really easy for them to pair themselves with a company that sells video equipment, that sells VCRs and things like that, because people come in to buy a VCR because they have these old family home videos, but they don't know what to do with them, and so they're coming to a Radio Shack or they're coming to a Best Buy. If you have those types of relationships, then you can kind of co-brand and co-market your own services with similar industries. And also consider your audience's familial situation. If you are trying to reach out to a family with small kids based on the product that you offer, then there's an opportunity to try and target a certain demographic in a certain way in a certain area. So how do you get your message in front of your audience? Let's really quickly take a look at a couple of things. Where does your audience spend their time? When are they there? So these are the kind of the next set of questions that we're going to be looking at. I'm going to try and go through these as quickly as I can because I know we have a lot to cover still. So when are they there and why are they there? These are the types of questions that we have to ask so that you can then customize your message based on that information. So where does your audience spend most of their time? Let's just kind of look at America in general. And obviously, since we're talking about social media and the ways that you can use social media in this webinar, we'll focus on that. So where does the audience spend their time? Well, 11 hours of the average American's day is spent consuming media of some sort. That's almost half of your waking day. On average, Americans, I actually just looked this up today, on average, Americans get a little less than 6.5 hours of sleep a night. So you take that 6.5 hours out of the 24, and you're down to 17.5 hours. Well, if 11 hours of that 17 are spent consuming media, I'd be willing to bet that the rest of it is probably eating, driving, whatever it happens to be, but it's not going to be an opportunity for you to get your message in front of people. So media is a really good way to dispense that information in your message. 2 hours a day is spent on social media, and for teens, it jumps up to 9 hours a day. Okay, so all of these things, and this is, so based on these ages, this is the percentage of people, Americans, that have and are on social media. 88% of people between the age of 18 and 30, 30 to 49 is 78%, and even those 50 to 64, 64% of them are on social media, which really creates an opportunity for you as a business owner, as a marketer, to use social media to your advantage. Okay, so you can look at this graph over here. This is kind of how the media hours break out, a little over 4 hours on live TV. And then you have apps, which web on a smartphone, that really tends to be a lot of your social media. People opening up Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, even YouTube on their phones. So then you have radio, which is probably during that time while we're driving in the car. That's probably the only time anybody really ever listens to the radio unless they have it on in the background while they're at work. But then it kind of really decreases from there. But that's where all of that time is spent as a U.S. adult. 60% of all social media time is on a mobile device. And that's kind of where you lean towards those apps and the webs on the smartphone. 60% of all social media time, so that 2 hours a day, 60% of that comes from a mobile device. This is how that time breaks out. So an average American spends 40 minutes on YouTube, 35 minutes on Facebook, 25 on Snapchat, 15 on Instagram, and 1 minute on Twitter. That equates to be quite a bit of time in the course of a year or a lifetime. So let's look specifically at Facebook. Here are some specific statistics that have come out of Facebook. 50,000 new users every single day. Okay, that's 6 new users every second. 2.3 billion monthly users, like I said before, 1.5 billion daily. 68% of all Americans are on Facebook. 79% of all online U.S. adults are on Facebook. 76% of them check it every single day. And they spend, like I said before, 35 minutes a day and have an average of 150 friends. And even half of those who don't have Facebook live with someone that does, and 24% of them, so a quarter of those that don't have Facebook, are actually checking their family members' Facebook profiles so they can see the photos and posts anyway. Facebook, and this is just kind of a commentary on the behemoth that is the #1 social networking site in the world, Facebook. Facebook takes up 22% of all internet time that Americans use. 22%, a quarter almost, of all of the time that we spend online is spent on Facebook. And that's compared to 11% for YouTube and Google combined. That's kind of a scary thought, but it also provides us an opportunity to put our message in a place where people actually are. Okay, so now moving on to Twitter. 50 million users visit Twitter a month without even logging in. They're looking at Twitter for news information. That's where a lot of journalists spend a lot of their time, is on Twitter, because it is that instantaneous, quick headline type approach. 1.3 billion accounts, 326 million monthly active users. The average Twitter has 707 followers. 500 million tweets are sent each day. That's 6,000 every second. Okay, 24% of Americans use Twitter. 66% of U.S. companies use it to market. And 80% of active users prefer using it on a mobile device. Okay, looking at YouTube. So we're going to quickly go over all of these different platforms, and then we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how to potentially start using some of these things. So 300 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every single minute of every single day. 1 billion hours are watched a day, and an average person spends 40 minutes a day watching YouTube videos. I have to admit, I get sucked in to YouTube. As I teach my journalism classes, I have my students submit their news packages and news videos to me using a YouTube link. And I need to stop doing that because all of a sudden I will get sucked into the videos on the side over here. And I will start watching videos about theories about Avengers Endgame and what's going to happen, or the next new big thing coming out of Texas, or different things. And I just get sucked into a rabbit hole. And so I can understand why people spend 40 minutes a day watching YouTube. Over 50% of views come from mobile, though. I don't know if that's people on the bus, people in line watching while they're walking to class. I see enough of that on campus that it wouldn't surprise me. But 73% of Americans actually have an account on YouTube. 94% of Americans 18 to 24 are uploading videos, and mobile sessions average more than 40 minutes a day. 1.15 billion mobile views a day for different videos. 9% of U.S. small businesses use YouTube. It is a little bit harder of a platform to use, but I think a lot of that 9% is being used by companies uploading to YouTube and then embedding that video on their website. 1.9 billion logged in users every month. And more, YouTube reaches more 18 to 49-year-olds than cable or broadcast network television. I think it's kind of just a commentary on where we are with trying to time shift our viewing and not be stuck to a traditional broadcast signal. So Instagram, this one is 800 million users a month. 60% of users are on it daily. It is the second highest level of engagement behind Facebook for its users. Yes, question?
Yeah, and someone said, don't forget Facebook's reach through Instagram, that it's a Facebook platform now.
Yes, it is.
And then someone asked, do you feel organic social efforts are more or less valuable than paid efforts when encouraging your audience to engage with your content?
That is a good question, and it always comes down to the authentic, earned media rather than the paid media. Because when you can actually develop your brand image with a specific user on social media to the point where they become a brand ambassador for you, they sit there and they start preaching your brand to other people, that sincerity comes through. People know that businesses buy media. People know that they buy advertisements and they sponsor posts on social media. And that can work because regardless, as you get that exposure, people become familiar with your brand, and the more familiar they are with your brand, the more positively they see your brand. That was kind of the basis of all of the research that I did in my dissertation. But if you can get that organically, first of all, you're saving yourself money. Second, you know that the people that are seeing this know that the person that's sharing it is a real person, not one of those umpteen million bots or fake accounts that are established on Facebook on a regular basis. And so I would definitely side on the part of getting earned media rather than paying for posts. It works a lot more effectively, in my opinion. But it is something that sometimes using both approaches simultaneously makes your campaign or your advertising, your branding that much more effective. And yes, I do recognize that Facebook owns Instagram, and it would not surprise me that that is one of the reasons why Instagram is the second most engaging. I think it also has a lot to do with the fact that it's where teens are. If you look at that second to last statistic, 24% of US teens say that Instagram is their favorite social media. I know it's my wife's favorite social media and a lot of her family. I haven't been that active on Instagram myself because I have used it primarily for business. And so Instagram is a little bit harder to monetize, but it is still something that you can utilize to your benefit, because if you can get your brand, like I said before, in front of people, and the more familiar they are with your brand, the more positive they see you, the higher and stronger your brand image, which in turn makes it more likely that they will actually purchase something from your company. Speaking to that, 90% of users are younger than 35 on Instagram. and 50% of users do follow brands on Instagram, which is different than any other social media. Most social media, people don't follow brands. But on Instagram, they do want to see what these new products are. So when you're putting out a new product or a new menu item, if you have a food or a restaurant establishment, take photos of these things and post those. Put those on your website. Have them monetize and talk to each other. That'll always really help. LinkedIn. This is one of those social networking sites that seem to be kind of relegated to the mature adults in most people's minds. 500 million members, 106 million access it monthly, and over 1 million have published content on the site. But a lot of this is based on the use of people looking for work, people trying to increase their network in a professional environment. There are certain things that Rebecca Cooney talks about for your LinkedIn profiles that I would recommend. They're involved in the branding, Brand Yourself 1.0 and 2.0. Those are really, really helpful suggestions and very, very well thought out. So I would recommend, once again, that you go visit that Global Connections webinar series. But let's talk about Snapchat. This is one of my favorites. And I know it's not as glitzy and popular as it could be. But I love Snapchat. Snapchat is one of the things that I go to every single day. 187 million active daily users. I'm one of those. 60% of them are under the age of 25. That is not me. $90 million are spent on Snapchat ads. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that these companies know where their audience is. And so they're willing to spend money even on these smaller social media channels that don't necessarily have as many people, because they're not going for the old school advertising shotgun approach of let's just get it in front of as many eyeballs as possible. They're going for that targeted audience. Another question.
Do you think that Facebook stories and Instagram stories are potentially pushing Snapchat out of the marketplace?
I think that is one of the reasons why Snapchat hasn't been more successful than it was. I feel like Snapchat kind of peaked for a little bit and then it's come down a little. But at the same time, I feel like there are a lot of companies and a lot of businesses that are starting to invest in the storytelling atmosphere of Snapchat, and the fact that unlike Instagram stories and Facebook stories, that's all Snapchat is. It is a very, very specific, goal-driven company like we've been talking about. They know who they are and they know what they do and they can market that. And because they can market that, I can tell you that there are very specific channels that I watch every single day religiously to get certain information. Washington Post is one of those. They have a Discovery Channel on Snapchat, and I watch it religiously. And I noticed today as I watched through it that half the stories that they had on their Snapchat weren't on their normal website. I went to check, and they weren't there. And so they know their audience, and they know who they're playing to, and they have a certain type of story on Snapchat than they do in other locations. NBC News does a Snapchat. ESPN Sports Center does a Snapchat. A whole bunch of different companies do those types of Snapchats, and they're geared towards a very, very specific demographic. 78% of Americans 18 to 24 have Snapchat, and they spend 25 minutes a day on Snapchat. 24% believe it's better than Instagram, and 47% of U.S. teens feel it's better than Facebook. So that kind of speaks to your question about whether or not Facebook and Instagram are going to push things out. But I feel like a lot of the young people, the teenagers that I talk to when doing research, a lot of them claim that Facebook is for mom and dad and maybe for political things. It is still, because of its size, it is still one of the best opportunities for companies and individuals to use social media to their advantage through branding and marketing. But I feel like this younger generation wants to avoid all the politics. They want to avoid the commentary and the bickering and the back and forth. Snapchat is just straightforward, and it is what it is, and they know what it is, and they're comfortable with that. So one of the things that I think is kind of interesting, and this is something we're going to get into as we move forward a little bit, is that the peak time for Snapchat is on Saturdays. The peak time for posting on Snapchat and doing different things on Snapchat is on Saturday. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that those 18 to 24-year-olds, those teenagers, are more free to go film and shoot and record different cool things that they're doing that they want to share with their friends. So this is kind of taking all of that information and looking at the 6 different platforms that we've kind of talked about really quickly. 68% of U.S. adults are on Facebook, 73 on YouTube, and you can see those numbers, how they kind of taper off. Then looking at it by gender, 62% of men, U.S. adult men, are on Facebook, 74 are women. 75 men use YouTube, 72% of women. And you can see how this disparity, women are definitely using Instagram more than men. Men and women are both using LinkedIn the same amount. And women are definitely using more of the Twitter and the Snapchat and those kind of image-based sharing social medias. I think it's kind of interesting that the only 2 that are either even or male heavy are YouTube and LinkedIn. I don't know if it's because men like me get distracted by moving pictures on YouTube, or if it's a situation where on LinkedIn you have men that are focused on getting a job and women are surging into the workforce and are competing that way, so it's even in LinkedIn. I don't know what the reasoning is. All I know is the statistics. Now breaking it down by age, you can see how it obviously gradually tapers off at the bottom with the 65 plus. But I was actually really surprised to see that 65 plus are still 40% of them are using YouTube. 41% of them are on Facebook, probably looking at their grandkids' photos and posts. But then you also have 10% of them are on Instagram, looking at those photos and things as well there. You also, so now that we've kind of talked about where the audience is, where they're spending their time on social media, it's important to know when they're going to be in those locations. So when you think about when they're going to be there, when they're going to be on social media, you have to think about all the different types of things that might contribute to that. Is it so for example, consider a 35-year-old man with 3 kids, right? Where does he spend most of his time? Probably at work, probably trying to provide for that family. When is he able to check social media? Well, it's probably either right at the very beginning of the day when he sits down at his computer at work, or on his way home, on his way to his car, maybe after he gets home and helps put the kids to bed, he jumps onto social media first thing in the morning. So you're typically going to, if you're targeting that 35-year-old man, who has a young family, and you're targeting your message to him, you're going to want to focus at the beginning and the end of the day. That's when you're going to want to publish your message, and you're going to want to do it on the platforms where you know he's most likely going to be. YouTube, Facebook, those types of places. What about a stay-at-home mom? I would be willing to bet that you probably have a good surge of women checking Facebook at around 10 when a lot of young kids go take their naps, maybe at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, these are the types of logical things, and although a lot of them may be based on stereotypes and the assumptions that are made, a lot of those things are realities because of those routines that we find ourselves in, with kids getting home from school, kids being at school. College students, when are they going to be most active? Probably at like 10 o'clock at night, let's be honest. And so then you have a retired veteran. When is he or she most likely going to be involved in looking at media? Probably before 7 o'clock in the evening, sometime late afternoon, 3:30, 4 o'clock. Those are the types of things that you need to consider. And where they are and when is typically going to be dictated by their current circumstances. So depending on who the audience is that you're trying to target, what demographic that is, what age group that is, you're going to have to consider those things as you try to use social media to your advantage. As for why, in the communications field, we have a theory called uses and gratifications. And this is kind of it in a nutshell. The audience uses a specific media for a specific purpose. And as they use that media, they determine whether or not that purpose has been met. And if it has, they continue to use that media. But these are the 4 things and motives that have been articulated in this theory and in this research that people use media for. Using media to find out what is around them. This is that surveillance. You're trying to figure out what's going on so you're not left out at the water cooler when you're at work or talking to your friends. You want to know what's going on, the whole Zion Williamson thing, or the Cohen trial that was going on the last couple of days, him accusing President Trump of being a racist, a con man, and a cheat. I mean, those types of things. You use media and surveillance to potentially be aware of those things so you don't feel out of the loop. Personal identity, trying to understand yourself. What is it that I like? What do I need? Shopping can fall into this. Identifying your own personal belief system. You're searching for an understanding, an inspirational video, the Goalcast videos that we see on Facebook all the time. That would be kind of a personal identity and self-understanding type thing. Personal relationships, we use it to replace companionship. And this is something that, regardless of your personal perspective on this issue, social media replaces personal communication all the time. Whether it's because people live a distance enough away that we can't be with them physically, or if it's because it's just time constraints that don't allow us to get together. Personal relationships, media serves to facilitate that. And then diversion, escape from everyday problems, emotional release. I know that when I get home and my wife's been dealing with our 3 kids all day, that is her primary motive for using media, is to escape, to relax, to just veg while eating a nice big bowl of mint chocolate chip Ferdinand's ice cream. Best thing in the world. So those are the reasons. And some other people have come up with these gratifications for social media specifically, looking for self-confidence, pleasure, empowerment, those types of things. And those are great, but the ones on the left side of the screen are the official elements of the theory of uses and gratifications. So how do you keep your audience? And this is kind of going to wrap everything up. I'm going to finalize everything here on this slide and then maybe open it up for a few more questions. Once you have your audience and you've put your message in front of them, you need to keep them. And that is so hard in this world of infinite numbers of content providers and businesses that are popping up out of nowhere. People that are starting businesses and going on to Shark Tank because they started something in their garage or on their kitchen table. And all of a sudden they're vying for your business. You have to have an engagement strategy. You have to have a plan. How often are you going to communicate with your audience? How often are you going to post on Facebook? How often are you going to put out a photo on Instagram? How often are you going to be involved in Snapchat? And what does that look like? Having a plan is one of the most important things that you can do. And I would even encourage you to put it out on a calendar. Schedule these things out. Plan what you're going to do. Obviously, don't actually schedule the posts. Post it and then schedule it to be published at a certain time. That's always a bad idea. One, because something might happen societally that all of a sudden your company or your business or you personally start to look insensitive because you're posting something about your new dessert menu item when something serious has just taken place in Washington, D.C. or in Florida with the Parkland school shooting. The last thing you want to do is look like you're out of touch. But regardless, your engagement strategy should have everything that you do pointing back to yourself. Have everything linked with hashtags and post everything and have it with a link back to your website or with a coupon code in an email, anything that actually is branding yourself, and brand yourself as much as you can everywhere you can. Because the more people see your brand, the more familiar they are, the more positive it is, the more likely they are to participate in purchasing something from you. And get involved. There are hashtags going on and things that are trending all the time. Get involved in those conversations. Make sure that, especially if it's something that can relate to your business, be involved in those conversations. Interject. Share your opinion. And put yourself in a position where people see you as an authority on whatever subject you claim to be an expert and a business for. And then use visuals. There's a reason why Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram are all on the rise. It's because they use visuals. Even in emails, you are so much more likely to actually keep an email and read through the entire thing if it's filled with an infographic or if it's filled with some sort of artistic photo or video link or something. Use visuals. That is one of the biggest things that I can suggest. And then you just have to be consistent. Don't deviate from your image or your message. You want to keep it consistent. Coca-Cola is Coca-Cola because it's been Coca-Cola for decades. Nike is always the same. It's just do it. They just do it all the time. They know who they are. They know where they are. They know where they've been. They know where their audience is, and they are there. They put themselves in front of that audience all the time, and they know what their audience expects, and they give it to them. That is one of the most important things that I can suggest, is just being consistent, having a strategy, and using the knowledge of these demographics to customize your message based on your audience. Don't talk to a mom of 3 the same way you would talk to a teenage boy of 15 years old. Customize your message so that it relates to them and is something that they can get behind. Yeah, question.
Do you have any recommendations for accessibility challenges with infographics or other visuals, i.e. screen readers and closed captioning?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't personally, right off the top of my head. I know that I've used some in the past. But a lot of that, oh shoot, it's really slipped my mind. It's been a while since I've been in the industry using these types of things. I apologize. I will try and find that and maybe post it as a comment on the webinar that's being recorded, and it will be up online. But that is a really, really good question. I apologize that I don't really have an answer for you right now. I will find it. And I will let you know.
I can also give you her email.
Sweet, that would be great. I will get that, and I will try to email that to you as quickly as possible. Any other questions before we go? I have enjoyed doing this. I don't know how many of you guys enjoyed it, but I can imagine that you enjoyed it, and so it works out for me. If you do have any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email or anything on in my office. I'm happy to respond to anything. If you guys are locally here in Pullman, I'd be happy to visit with anybody, sit down and have additional conversations, maybe give some specific recommendations or brainstorm things that you might use in your own strategy for social media. But if there's nothing else, it looks like we have a couple more minutes. If you want, we could jump into YouTube and start going down that rabbit hole.
What are your thoughts on TV advertisements? Do you think it's becoming obsolete due to social media and streaming sites like Netflix and Hulu?
That is another good question. I personally believe that there is still enough of the demographic that watches TV live that television advertisements are still a very, very viable part of a strategy in marketing. Especially if you use the right targeting and customizing your options in the way of when you have your spots air on television. For example, I remember growing up as a young kid watching Bob Barker on Price is Right. And I also remember that every single time I watched that show, that all of the commercials were about diabetic testing supplies and Jazzy Power scooters and things that were geared towards a senior citizen audience, because that was who was watching CBS at 10 o'clock in the morning during the week. And so if you know your audience, if you're looking for eyeballs on a screen, the best time to do live television is during a sporting event or a reality TV series that demands people watch live. So I think there is still a very viable option to television advertising. And because most people still spend most of their time on media watching television, it's still a beast. But these are the types of strategies that if you were to supplement television, traditional media advertising with social media, it could be extremely beneficial. I hope that answered your question. Are there any other questions pop up? But yeah, so I thought I saw some questions popping up. So I'll just keep going on the...
How can small businesses utilize these strategies if they are just starting out?
That's a very good one. You guys are full of big questions. Using these strategies, I would assume you're talking about the social media strategies. One of the best things, like I said before, is trying to get earned media instead of paid for media. You can create all kinds of free, good-looking content online that you can then use to start publicizing your things yourself. Do an email rewards program. Send out coupons for your business. Set up an email list. Go to different events. Use social media to get involved in those trending conversations and talk about things with people that are in your area about, this is my business. This is what I do. You should check out this new thing. And as you do that, you can organically start to grow a grassroots movement around your business that doesn't cost anything. It costs a lot of time. But as a small business and as a small business owner, that's something that you have, time is the one thing you can put more in. And I know that it seems extremely difficult when you're already working 70 something hours a week trying to get your business off the ground. But if you don't have an audience, if you don't have a clientele, your business isn't going to succeed in the first place. So spending a little bit more time getting the right audience, getting yourself that brand image, building and strengthening itself through social media is something that will really help, and it doesn't cost anything. I would highly recommend, especially at the very beginning of a small business, not worrying about purchasing or boosting a post on a Facebook page or on an Instagram account. I just don't know that the monetary cost is worth the return on investment that you get. We have a couple more minutes. I'll take any last questions that you guys might have. I hope this helps. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. I love social media. It's been something that I've been fascinated with since Facebook came out and I was at college and got my first account. I still have it as my old college email address, which kind of dates me a little bit. But I remember when Facebook first came out and it was a lot of which person do you like more? Here are these two photos.
How do you see social media progressing in the coming years?
Love that question. So social media, in my mind, anybody who thinks that social media is a fad and it's going away is just sorely mistaken. And I feel for them in the deepest parts of my heart. Social media is doing nothing but growing. There may come a point where each different platform will hit a threshold where they don't really grow beyond that. But I don't think every single social media is meant to be consumed by every single person on the planet. Different media have different purposes and they want a different type of audience. But as those audiences grow and mature, they might shift. There might be a time in their life where they're focused on Snapchat and Instagram. And then they go to college and they start focusing on Instagram and Facebook. And then they leave that and they go into the business and they start working on LinkedIn and YouTube. And maybe then they start switching back to the Instagram or the Twitter. I just don't think it's going away. And I definitely think that as the older generation dwindles and the younger generations who have grown up as digital natives, as social media embedded individuals come up in society, that it will just become that much more prevalent. We are seeing a lot of that with time shifting and people using DVR and not watching traditional broadcast television signals anymore. Hulu, Netflix, having their own original series. People don't pay for television anymore. And if they do, it's because there are specific things that they can't get anywhere else. But those things, I think, are going to start dwindling even more because people want what they want, when they want it, where they want it, and how they want it. And that's one of the beautiful things about social media is it is customizable. It's something that is dictated by the user, by the audience. And that's one of the reasons why their brands are so strong. So I think that's all the time we have this evening. It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for participating. And if you are participating after the fact and would like to ask me any additional questions, feel free to shoot me an email or send something to Global Connections. I'm sure they can pass it along. So if you guys have any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, you guys have yourselves a beautiful day and enjoy the last few hours of the most snow-filled February we have ever had in the Northwest. Love you all. Take care.